I've never really been a malicious person. That being said, I still found myself at that damned skate park. People weaving in and out, rolling around, and of course, crashing. I only really came by to watch them all go at it. Call me sadistic, call me crazy, but when they fell, I got the oddest feeling. It wasn't pleasure, it wasn't contentment, it was just a feeling of righteousness, plain and simple. Every time I watched them slip, or fall, or trip over themselves, it was like a universal truth had hit me. So, I kept coming back. Sometimes, people got hurt badly. Sometimes, I'd help. But every time I went there, I'd see at least one person manage a trick, or a maneuver, that just didn't sit quite well with me. I'd instantly feel confusion and dread well up in my stomach, and the air around me went cold, and my skin clammy, as time seemed to slow down. Then, everything went back to normal. Events like these were common, as they happened almost every day, and my skate park was very popular with upwards of 50 people at any given moment. If you'd asked those people today, they'd tell you that they saw nothing unusual, that it was just a normal day at a normal park. That they didn't know what happened to Jeremy. Jeremy was a commoner at the skate park. Typical skater dude. He had safety pads, blonde hair, and always said "bra" a lot. It wasn't uncommon to see him do something fancy in the half pipe, or even a full flip with enough speed. He was the main center of focus at any given moment, other park visitors oohing and eyeing at his expertise. But one day, business as usual, he did something impossible. Literally impossible. I still don't know how he did it. If I did, I wouldn't be here to tell you about this, of course, because I'd probably be a floating cloud of atoms in the air right now. Jeremy hopped into the air, an ollie that required seemingly little effort, but he went just a little bit too high. I couldn't place my finger on how he did, but he did. That's when I felt it. The dread, as my skin grew clammy, and the air grew cold. However, instead of it passing as usual, he did another trick. This time, he rode up a ramp, pushed off, and bounced off of it just a little too far. At this point, everyone stopped what they were doing. The skate park felt unsafe, unwelcoming. The air was no longer cold, it was hot. Hot with anger, of a presence that we did not understand. Everybody froze in terror, a look of confusion and horror in their eyes. Everyone except for Jeremy. He kept on, pulling 180s, doing flips, each one seeming to defy gravity and sound logic. The ramps gave way to his board, reforming themselves how they once were after he was through them, and the air seemed to hoist him further upwards every time he jumped. The presence in the air grew thicker, the pressure more prominent. It was angry at him. He finished his round of tricks beaming, probably expecting the usual applause and cheers that followed his shows. He slowed to a stop in the middle of the park, then stood confused as everyone stared at him with wide-eyed terror. Then, he stopped moving. Not, he stopped moving as he dropped to the ground, dead. Not he stopped moving as he stood still. He just stopped moving. As if Jeremy was a statue. Then, the entire park watched in horror as he started to break apart, pieces of him floating away in seemingly random directions, shrinking in size as they floated through the air, until there was nothing left. Not even his skateboard. Then, all hell broke loose. People were screaming, families got in their cars and drove off, and some people just stared in shock at where Jeremy had once stood. Eventually, everything calmed down, and everyone started talking to each other, seemingly to reconcile themselves about what had happened. Oh my God, was I the only one that saw that? Holy shit, where'd he go? Jeremy? Where's he gone? Is this a trick? Everybody was in a state of disbelief and panic. We were all just trying to make sense of what had happened to him. Around this time is when a black SUV showed up. There was no explanation, no reasons, just an SUV in the lot, around 5 or so men filing out, each one walking with purpose and carrying flashlights in their hands, despite the fact that it was in the afternoon and still very bright out. Each one of them walked into the park and up to us, and started talking with everyone about what had happened. When they finally made their way over to me, trying to make sense of what had happened like everybody else, I launched a flurry of questions at them. What happened? Is he okay? Why are you here? They only told me that what occurred was a classified event and I was to speak with no one about what happened. Why, I asked them. What if I do? One of the men looked aggravated, and then pointed to one of the other suits, talking to a man. He was in hysterics, eyes nearly bugging out of his skull and arms flailing in the air as he shouted at the suit, who eventually pulled out one of the flashlights they had been carrying earlier, and stepped back as he aimed it at the hysteric man's eyes. There was a blinding light emitting from it for a split second, And then the man stared dumbly at nothing. He stood like he was dazed, drooling and seemingly vacant. As if he had shaken out of a trance, he looked at the men, and then everyone else confusedly. He was then told to go home, which he did without further question. Then, I understood. Everyone did. If we refused to keep what had happened in the park a secret, they'd erase our memory of it ever happening. Everyone that was still at the park grew visibly nervous, as the men continued taking oaths of silence from everyone there, and I finally obliged. When all was said and done, the park cleared out, the suits and citizens alike. I should have left it alone, a dark thought in the back of my head. The people who witnessed it must have been really good at keeping their mouths shut, because a day later, there was missing posters around the neighborhood and not so much as a stray rumor about what could have happened to Jeremy. Not me though. I grew restless and sleepless, reminiscing about what had occurred in that moment. God, how I wish I'd have just let them take my memory. Suddenly, it dawned on me. Every time the air grew cold, every time someone tripped on seemingly nothing, every time the forces of nature seemed to fall back in place. There was something in that park that day, something that didn't like how Jeremy had unknowingly violated our known laws of physics. So, after many empty nights, and many unanswered questions, I decided that I'd delve deeper into the subject. I built a career in law enforcement. It wasn't hard since I was still young and had room to grow, as well as train. After I became an official police detective soon after my 34th birthday, I immediately logged into our case network. I was right. All of those sleepless nights, those times I bit back my tongue to avoid giving away my true motives, I'd made it. It had all led up to this moment. Our crime network had extended past my humble city. As a detective, I had clearance to access cases from all over the country. Cold cases, new ones, unpublished records, it was all here. Technology really is a wonder. Under the guise of doing my job, I collected data and knowledge over the years, unbeknownst to my colleagues. I found an abundance of unsolved missing cases. This was not uncommon. What was uncommon, however, was that for a slight percentage of these cases, there was the oddball. A person in a crowded area that seemingly vanished into nowhere, with supposed witnesses claiming to have all seen nothing and the case immediately dropped. After years of browsing, and writing, and notes, it was done. This was my ultimatum. I created a formula. A simple one, really. I had learned of the types of people most likely to unwittingly break the allowed physics of our universe. What followed next was a blur. Somewhere along the line, I gained access to traffic cameras. I effectively stalked a list of the people that I deemed important. I set up cameras and followed them on their daily commute. I wasn't even working a job at this point. I had saved up well enough money to ensure that I had room and board until the end of my days. I just followed my list, stalked the people unfortunate enough to fit the profile, and hoped that something happened. Something to prove that I wasn't crazy, something to pay off for all of my work. I had been driving myself insane, following leads and targets that led me nowhere. One day, while stalking a woman, Piper, along her usual route, I was about to turn back. I had been following this routine for about a year now with different people and I'd eventually came to expect nothing. Then, it happened again. Piper was on her daily walk. I can only assume that she knew the path well, because she often walked straight portions with her eyes closed, nodding along to whatever was coming out of her headphones. Something caught my eye. There was a small hitch in the sidewalk, where if she walked, she would surely trip. I knew I couldn't warn her from afar, and risk making my tailing obvious. So, she kept on walking. She walked through the hitch. That's right, through it. She didn't trip, didn't stumble, didn't step over it. It was as if her foot had phased through the flayed edge of the concrete. I then watched as the edge settled into place, right back where it had been. I stared in amazement and shock. Amazement soon turned to dread, and the temperature seemed to drop. That's when I noticed the yellow caution tape in the ditch in her route. I learned later that a pipe had ruptured underneath the sidewalk, and an excavation team had been ordered to replace the pipe, digging up the sidewalk and the dirt underneath it all the same. Piper didn't even hear the man calling out to her to stop, that she was going to fall. Whatever was on her headphones obviously overpowered their shouts. That was when I was forced to witness, for a second time in my life, the impossible. It was immaculate. I watched in razor-sharp detail as the caution tape bent around her figure, splitting in half to allow her passage, mending behind her silently as if nothing had happened. The team grew quiet, eyes bugging out, staring in shock and confusion as they visibly ceased. The subtle whisper of doom became a growl. The air grew hot with anger, with rage, as Piper walked over the edge. She'd surely fall, right? She just walked over a ledge opening up to a pit. Instead of Piper falling down and surely suffering a much more preferable outcome, she just kept on walking. As if the ground was solid. As if she wasn't floating in air. Then, she stopped. She just stopped. I then watched in horror as she befell the same fate as Jeremy had all those years ago. Me and the team in the ditch watched in disbelief as Piper froze in midair, fragmenting into pieces before our very eyes, until nothing left remained of her. There was no screaming this time. The crew looked at each other with a shared thought of, what the hell just happened? I knew better to wonder along with them though. The suits would be arriving any minute now, and if they saw my face twice, I was surely done for. Since then, I've witnessed upwards of 30 more occurrences, of disappearances that are never solved, because they can't be. Nobody knows where they go, or what becomes of them. Except for me. Normally, I'd be on my routine, documenting behavior, perfecting my formula, and watching people disappear. However, I write this an hour after the last disappearance, while I watched a man fragment before my eyes as he walked through the door of his workspace, and then fragmented into pieces as he slid frictionlessly on the pavement. This time, instead of the heat and discomfort usually associated with these events leaving, it stayed with me. All the way on my drive home. All the way into my house, and into my bed, where I soaked my sheets within the hour. Still now, as I write this, I am sweating in my seat. I don't know what happened. I didn't phase through anything, walk on air, glide on land, or do anything of the sort. I'm saying this because it's fairly obvious why it's here. I believe this is why no people have been able to come forward with evidence about the missing cases. Whatever has been causing them doesn't like their curiosity. It's probably weighing my life in its hands right now, wondering if it's worth its efforts to cease my existence this very second. I don't think it knows that I'm writing this. Needless to say, whether or not I wake up in one piece, my research ends here. One thing is for certain though. There's something watching us, calculating, monitoring the universe to keep its laws in check. Whatever it is, it shows no mercy to those who cross its line. Be thankful when you trip on seemingly nothing, stumble, or suddenly lose your footing trying to jump. Take it for what it is, a warning. After all, you never know. You may be the next one to break its rules.